Hello, everyone. Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with the wonderful Tony-nominated Roger Bart. Roger, congratulations on this latest nomination for you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sam.
Um, this obviously with Back to the Future, it's an iconic film, and Christopher Lloyd created something with Doc Brown that everyone, quotes and knows. So, how do you come in and make your own stamp on this character that everyone already knows and loves?
Well, you are correct. Chris did such an extraordinary job with as I think he always does, because Chris is one of those actors too that everything you see him in, whether it's Roger Rabbit or Taxi, you kind of never forget him. Even I remember him even in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, being in that along with Danny DeVito, ironic coincidentally, and he's just one of these guys that you just remember. There's a certain intensity to him. He's always kind of funny. He's got a wonderful sort of expression as I say, of intensity and concentration, and he's very committed to everything. And so when you take a part like this, and I've done this also with a few other roles that are have been made sort of so famous by actors in the movies. I try to take the basic qualities of what I love about their performance in that particular work, and so I tried to take the quality of him being um, um, surprising, and unpredictable, intense, and animated and funny. And I think ultimately, as was the case when I was doing the producers with Gary Beach, the most important thing of all is that the audience feel the affection and friendship between he and Marty McFly, and I feel like that the relationship and the love that Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd had for each other on screen really was communicated in a way that was very palpable. And I feel like that's very important too. So after that, since I'm not much of an impersonator, beyond the occasional sort of oral references of like "Great Scott," things that are that you will always remember and audiences want. Um, I'm able to just veer off into things that I do to still answer those certain the criteria that I picked up from watching them in the movie.
Yeah, it seems like it's a show because it is so larger than life. I think it really gives license to kind of swing for the fences and
Yeah.
swing big. What is it like being able to play on that kind of massive scale?
Oh, it's wonderful. And it's one of the things that I've always loved about being on a big stage is that. Um, were I to do the movie of this, it would be much more internalized and much more focused, obviously, because of the size of your frame is so different. Um, and and that was what was so tricky about Young Frankenstein, was that it was a movie, satire of a genre that was film, and so it was very difficult to suddenly, I had to communicate very largely to some of these situations in a big 22 seat, 100 seat house. And Gene Wilder had, of course, had a camera right here so that he would be able to communicate sort of details. The thrill that for me in a part like this is that Chris is, and the part is referred to as a lunatic, crazy, wild-haired inventor, sort of an Einstein with more flaws, um, and that does give license to a size and an animation, both from Chris and also just from what the needs are of the character. The interesting thing about Back to the Future is that it's this wild sci-fi movie that are the bookends of basically an old-fashioned love story taking place in 1955. And so when you come back and you see Marty and Doc and you visit them, peppered throughout the story as he tries to figure out a way to get back to home to 85. Um, have to remind the audience that the stakes are huge, that we're running out of time. It's very important. Time is always an issue. So there's a sense of urgency you have to remind them of. And that, we are in a world where we have to operate, as is the case with a lot of sci-fi, futuristic sci-fi, where if you take your car and drive it with a flux capacitor mixed with a little plutonium to 88 miles per hour, you'll be able to time travel. That is such a kind of a funny premise that is, of course, if you think about it, it's absurd. But um, I love things like that because that means that we're in a world where the audience has to make a leap of faith and belief in something, and that means that sometimes large acting kind of can go with that. It accompanies that, um, just because it's sci-fi fun.
Yeah. Well, I talked to Alan Silvestri and Glenn Ballard earlier this season, and they said they were so inspired by your commitment to those big swings that, it helped them write, and they maybe even added some more moments
Yeah.
for Doc Brown. What was that like getting songs from them and working with those two?
Well, I mean, it's a great honor to work with them, and they are wonderful collaborators. Um, I think that in early rehearsals, uh, there were opportunities as you once you sort of begin the show and introduce Doc and the situation and lay out all the exposition. A second act affords time for you to kind of calm down and get a little bit more grounded and a little bit more intimate, where some of the insanity goes away, and you realize you get to peek at that Doc's his fallibility, his insecurity, his fears, um, and his vulnerability and his love for his friend. And I tried, I'm a father of two, and there is something very paternal at times about this relationship between Doc and Marty, and there's also something very about being buddies, because I learned from him as well. That's the same way I've learned from my daughters. And so I think that the guys, Glenn and Alan, recognize that I liked to go a little to deep in that way. And they wrote me that beautiful For the Dreamer song because it really got the chance to sort of take illuminate this more the personal challenges, the insecurities that Doc feels like, as he feels like he's an F up, you know what I mean? And he doesn't want to F up. So that's been wonderful. And the other thing that Alan um, does, which was such a treat for me and for everybody in our show, you know, normally with when you put on musicals, you'll get underscoring that is your character theme, and it won't necessarily be that animated, but Alan is very writes in an incredibly sophisticated and orchestral way, would support scenes through his underscoring, and all the scenes took huge lift when he did that and when it was integrated. And I had never heard of anything like that in the theater, and it was really extraordinary. And really, he's always doing a lot of the work for you in terms of creating tension, letting you know when things are going to run deep. And so it's a great asset. The two of them are so brilliant, and I'm just so I had such a good time working with them and being supported by them, and I just love their work.
Yeah, that excuse me, that For the Dreamer song is so wonderfully unexpected, I think, in a
It
show like
is,
this.
it is. It, I don't think that Chris in the movie, I think Robert Zemeckis, the director of the movie, describes songs, and I think aptly so, as a long close up. And For the Dreamers is like the camera is pushing in as you realize, and I think that Chris Lloyd and the doc in the movie has moments where you look at him and go, everything's got to be great, and you see in his eyes a feeling of he's not really 100% sure, but he's risking his best friend's life. So I think he's very scared of messing up. And what For the Dreamers provides is a real peek into somebody who is very concerned about screwing up, and by raising a glass to people who give things a good college try, and who still have there's integrity in failure, is a way of being able to speak about it, and yet it still masks underneath this the feeling of um it's that I'm gonna mess this up. There's many lines in the show like you know, I finally invent something that works. You know, that's somebody who has swung and missed a lot. So the idea is suddenly that you find out in the future that you hit one out of the ballpark. And then you also are cognizant of the fact that if you mess with anything in the past, it could affect the future. Only a person who truly recognizes that he's can been more often than not a failure would at least be concerned that even knowing that I'm going to do it, that I've succeeded in the future, I still might screw it up.
Mm. Well, I think one of the things I love too is the relationship, which you touched on a little bit, but you and Casey Likes have great chemistry on stage. And I'm curious what it's like having that core relationship in the show with an actor who is really kind of starting out
Yeah.
his career these days. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, we do get along really well. I like Casey very very much, and I like being on stage with him. It's really been fun. Um, being fond of each other off stage really does, of course, translate. And so you have to, you just it's not a forced thing too. You have to spend time rehearsing. When you do theater with people, it's and you make a movie. You're in the trenches with everybody, the crew, we're all in the trenches together. And so it's what's really sweet about it too is that since he's not really done anything like this before, this kind of brand of comedy and sort of show, um, particularly because he and I introduced this notion in the show that we are aware that when out of nowhere, dancing girls will appear behind me, a chorus people will and start singing. That is a very interesting premise, and I think that he's had a great time kind of trying to find that really interesting line of, we're self-aware, we're on stage telling a story, and tricky for him because he's the hero, which means that he can kind of dip his toe in, whereas I'm a little bit more able to kind of play a little bit more and be aware. So he's really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed it with him, and um, uh, and he's playful. He's extraordinarily brave. I mean, I don't think I had that confidence when I was 22. He is so confident. So we managed to just and he's so loose. I thought the first night, I thought, gosh, he's going to be so nervous. Is he going to be okay? And it was like nothing. It was nothing. Spielberg was in the fourth row. He was like, he's amazing. So he's a good kid, and I hope he's learning a fun thing or two from me about the math and the science of doing comedy on stage. I think he is, and our rapport as a person who's been doing this a long time with somebody who's brand new to the scene, it is extremely helpful as part of the dynamic of this relationship on stage.
Mm. And you've been involved with this show for a long time now as it's developed, and you did it across the pond.
Yep.
You're no stranger, of course, to a long run in a show. You returned to the producers many times. I know I saw you on tour with Young Frankenstein. You toured that for a long time.
Mm.
How do you, when you have a long run like this, keep it fresh, keep it interesting and new for yourself?
Well, it's interesting. I recently saw a clip of Frank Zappa talking about. He goes, the interview question was, "Do you consider yourself a good guitarist?" He said, "I consider myself somebody who is technically proficient at understanding how to make this thing work." But he also said that he was the kind of artist where he knew that he had a certain amount of time, and then he knew had a framework. The framework being the key of the tune, and the tune itself, and how much time he had, and what he felt like the tune needed to have. And I think that if I'm an actor who studied Meisner technique, which is a lot about being present, about working. off somebody, and whatever's happening is happening in the very present. And it's in its when it's at its best in this with this in mind, it's a little like jazz musicianship. You know the tune, you know you have a solo, you're going to be pretty much hitting certain things all the time the same way to make sure that you sing the tune and play the tune, but you can keep it different depending upon how you feel. And so it, with that in mind, I think that, that's how I try to approach a long run like this. Even I will even sometimes abandon certain things that are working really well just because there's a point where it becomes too stale and you have to reinvent. You have to be willing to let go of stuff that works, because once you become a machine, once the people on stage with you stop listening to you because they know what's coming, the audience knows when somebody's not listening. And so it's really important for you to kind of maintain the reality of two people responding off of each other and listening to each other and having to pay attention, and it's really fun with Casey, of course, because I keep him on his toes. You don't want to ever be too much like a machine. And as Zappa was saying, there's something incredible about a beautiful worked out guitar solo. And it's perfect. It's just perfect. It's perfectly played. But I would rather be the person who maybe doesn't necessarily play it perfect, but that one night, it's perfect for that one night, and it'll be like no other night. And that's what I love about doing theater.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the audiences, and I have to imagine they're a huge source, because I think this is one of the titles that, just based on the title alone, really gets in people who maybe are not usual theater folk and usual ticket buyers. And this is kind of like the introduction, I imagine, for many people.
Yeah.
What energy does that give the audience? What has your interactions been like?
Meaning in terms of how they respond to the way I work?
Yeah.
Or to the idea of people saying that they don't come to theater much, and well, it's kind of fun because there's a couple things there that I love. I love the idea that I'm going to shake them up a little bit, and that they're going to have the experience, hopefully, that I had watching every time I watch Chris Lloyd in something, which is a sense of surprise always. I'm going to be surprised, and it's going to be a little edgy because and a little dangerous because you should not feel like you'll know what I'm going to do. And that keeps people very on the edge of their seat. The first thing I love to do is sort of engage you have to get an audience to if it doesn't have a leader, which means a laugher, you have to get them engaged in their core so that a laugh turns from this to which is huge, because then you start to get them laughing out loud. The other thing that I love in this kind of world where people are expecting, the movie, and they don't know what they're really in for. I come from, my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, was a vaudevillian who toured with George Burns and Gracie Allen in the late 20s and early 30s. And I've been a lover of Warner Brothers cartoons for years and years. And a lot of the stuff that I do is old school kind of vaudeville rhythm, which Bob Gale wrote a lot of lines in this thing with that you can hear the cadence. And it's really fun to introduce these audiences who may not know, particularly young kids. They don't know this style very much that I'm doing. So it's great for me to perpetuate that style and to kind of share it with a new generation of people who don't necessarily know it that well and understand what I'm doing, but they understand it's funny. I was talking to Bob Gale last night in my dressing room, and we were talking about an interview with Jackie Gleason, and the reporter, I think it was on 60 Minutes, they may have been Mike Wallace, said, why do you think Honeymooners is still popular? And he looked a little angry and he went, because it's funny. And it's really true. Funny is when you get an audience too that doesn't really understand, I can kind of quickly discern what are the references they're going to know. Are they going to be are they a language audience that makes them laugh, or is it going to be a physical comedy kind of audience? And I love an audience that English isn't their first language because they go for something else, and it's fun to design a meal, which is like your performance, and a show, so that everybody's going to love something about it.
Yeah,
But never
absolutely.
at the expense of the story. Hopefully,
Right.
never.
Well, it's a great meal you're serving. So
Oh,
congratulations again on your Tony nomination. Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you stick with us the rest of the season. Roger, thank you so much for
thank
joining
you.
me.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Sam.